wherein he mentions that he is voice without form. Let us begin by a prayer sung or written in describing the teachership of Swami Vivekananda. It is composed by one of his brother disciples, Swami Ramakrishnananda. Tam deshikendram paramam pavitram vishwasya palam madhuram yatindram hitaya nrinam naramurtimantam viveka anandamaham namami. Salutations to Swami Vivekananda, who is the teachership congealed, as it were, and who has assumed this human form for the welfare of human beings. We see that Swami Vivekananda had been described after his appearance at the Parliament of Religions by many scholars and journalists and in them there were all the very important clergies that have come from all different quarters of the world for the Parliament of Religions, Eastern and Western. They were unanimous in the praise of this great Hindu monk, and one journalist, one newspaper called him that he is an orator with divine right. And let me quote, this is from the newspaper Critic from Ohio, and it is October 7, 1893. And I quote, "But eloquent as were many of the brief speeches at this meeting, whose triumphant enthusiasm rightly culminated in this superb rendering by the Apollo Club of the Hallelujah Chorus, no one expressed so well the spirit of the Parliament, its limitations, and its finest influence as did the Hindu monk. I copy his address in full, but I can only suggest its effect upon the audience, for he is an orator by divine right, and his strong, intelligent face, in its picturesque setting of yellow and orange, was hardly less interesting than these earnest words and the rich rhythmical utterance he gave them." It is here we have to say that what is the source of all this oratory and teaching of Swami Vivekananda. And so let us go a little deep into how this Narendranath became Swami Vivekananda. I am going to give you just a brief outline. After a couple of weeks, you will be hearing a full lecture on this by another speaker, that making of Swami Vivekananda. That will be on January 28th. But let me give you a very brief outline that Sri Ramakrishna, as he was immersed in spiritual practices, and that was just out of the tremendous intensity of the love of God the truth, the essence of the whole existence, and therefore the goal of humankind. He was immersed in that. And then after that, he was told that there will be many students, many disciples who will be coming to him. And after a while, he saw them coming, and he had once a tremendous vision. The words of the vision seem to baffle logic. It is very difficult, well nigh impossible to logically comprehend them, but the words are like that. As his mind was soaring, Sri Ramakrishna was telling about his own vision. As his mind was soaring higher and higher, it went through various different planes and then reached the plane of indivisible, akhanda, indivisible. There was nobody with any name or form there, but even there were 7 great sages immersed in a superconscious deep state, in samadhi. And then it was all luminous around, and from that luminosity a little form of child came up, condensation of that luminosity. And then that child went to one of those sages, and then holding very tenderly to one of that, to that sage's back and neck, started arousing this sage from that deep meditation, deep trance. And as the sage came to outer consciousness, this little child said that, "I am going, you have to come with me." And then later on, Sri Ramakrishna said that very sage was Swami Vivekananda, Narendranath, as he was called before taking the monastic vows. So Narendranath, when Sri Ramakrishna saw that this is that sage, and the child was none other than Sri Ramakrishna himself. So this was the vision. Now it is the words of Sri Ramakrishna, as I mentioned earlier, they are somewhat baffling, but that doesn't mean that they are not true. We see many facts which baffle logic. That doesn't mean that they are not facts. It is now this Narendranath, when he saw Sri Ramakrishna saw him, he knew that this is going to be his instrument of spreading the wonderful message. The message that was accumulated needed to be spread all around, like a factory manufacturing things. All that needs to be distributed all around, otherwise no meaning for the manufacturing. So Sri Ramakrishna saw that this is the instrument, and he molded this instrument. You will listen to all that in the lecture that I told about 2 weeks later. So, but here we are just pondering over this point, and then almost when he was ready to give up his body after making this instrument ready for work. The instrument for distribution is ready. Now Sri Ramakrishna wrote that Naren is going to teach, Naren will teach. It is Sri Ramakrishna, being the incarnation of this modern age, did not rely just on giving the message verbally, because these days we want things in writing, we need proof. So Sri Ramakrishna too wrote it on the wall that yes, Naren will teach, that it is. And by that time, gradually, many of the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna were looking upon Naren as their leader. Automatically that leadership comes to a person where it doesn't need any election. It does not need anybody crowning that person as the leader. By the very qualities, by the very existence of that person, that position comes to that person automatically. So Naren became their leader. And then he came to West. It is all a great mystery really, how he decided to participate in this Parliament of Religions, that there were so many preparations going on. He heard about all that. His friends, disciples, they were urging him that you are the right person to represent Hinduism at the Parliament of Religions. But Swami Vivekananda was not feeling ready for it. He thought that there must be a divine command that he must get before embarking on this endeavor. And so two very important incidents took place during those days. One was, he saw Sri Ramakrishna walking on the waves of ocean and beckoning him to come after him. That was a very strong vision. And then he wrote to Holy Mother, Sri Ramakrishna's divine consort, that, well, should I go? And then Holy Mother's reply came, yes, you should go. So these two incidents, these two events settled all the doubts, and then he went there for the Parliament of Religions. And then, of course, rest is history. After that, Swami Vivekananda's life is more or less well documented because he became a well-known figure. So, while he was being praised and he was being invited to give his orations everywhere, he always thought himself as just a mere instrument in the hands of Sri Ramakrishna. He did not have any ego. This is how he became the perfect instrument of imparting the message of Sri Ramakrishna, who himself was the God assuming human form, God in human form, and this Swami Vivekananda was the instrument through which the message was being spread. It is a very interesting phenomena. It is almost impossible for us to imagine such a state because our lives are all egocentric life. I am telling you, don't you listen? So it is all, that I who speak. This doesn't become just an instrument of a divine message. it becomes instrument of the ego and arrogance or ignorance, whatever you may say. It is not the instrument of knowledge. In Swami Vivekananda, the ego was effaced. He had been told or somewhat in a complaining tone by his brother disciples that when the records of his lectures reached them, they saw that he is not speaking the name of Sri Ramakrishna. He is not telling people about Sri Ramakrishna. And he wrote back to them that, well, I am slave to Sri Ramakrishna. There is a beautiful letter written to Swami Shivananda, one of his great brother disciples. And he says, personally speaking, I am slave to Sri Ramakrishna. I fully accept that he is God incarnate. Not only that, he makes a very startling statement there, which would sound fanatic. In fact, at one time I used to think of it as a very fanatic statement. Although, when you read Vivekananda, this one thing you find is absence of fanaticism. But in that letter, he says, and it is my belief that nobody can understand the message of our ancient scriptures, Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita, unless one reads them in the light of the life of Sri Ramakrishna. But having accepted this, having understood this, I say that if I keep on talking about his name, then the message will get lost because people just get hung on the name and form. Therefore, what do we want? Sri Ramakrishna did not come for name or fame. Let us therefore preach the message of Sri Ramakrishna, which is most important. And then later on, he writes a letter to Ramakrishnananda, Swami Ramakrishnananda, with whose couplet on Vivekananda I began the lecture. He writes to him in a letter when a news came that somebody is criticizing him and so forth. He said, okay, let them criticize. He said, and I am reading only the relevant portion. This letter was written from Chicago in early 1894. The date was not given on the letter, but by reference you can understand that it was written very early in 1894. And he says, I quote, I want no name. I want to be a voice without a form. I do not require anybody to defend me. Who am I to check or to help the course of his, that H capital, his march? And who are others also? Still my heartfelt gratitude to them. Through Lord's will, the desire for name and fame has not yet crept into my heart, and I dare say never will. I am an instrument, and he is the operator. Again, he means God here. Through this instrument, he is rousing the religious instinct in thousands of hearts in this far-off country. Thousands of men and women here love and revere me. Through, and then he quotes a beautiful Sanskrit couplet, through his grace a dumb becomes eloquent and the lame cross mountains. I am amazed at his grace. Whichever town I visit, it is in an uproar. They have named me the cyclonic Hindu. Remember, it is his will. I am a voice without a form. you might have noticed, earlier he says, I want to be a voice without form. And in the same letter, after a few lines, he says, I am a voice without form. And this he has reiterated in one lecture he gave from London, that I am voice without form. It is, and what is this voice without form? It is a very interesting thing that we have to, think about. That we give message, we try to be, give it in a very authentic way, but still our personality interferes with it. And what we tell people is a mixture of what we understood and our understanding, because there also the ego intervenes, our personality intervenes, is not correct. And then when we tell, there is again the ego plays, and so what gets conveyed is not exactly the proper message. So a voice without form is where no such intervention takes place. The message is given as it is. There was Swami Vivekananda's a younger biological brother, Mahendranath Datta. He had written many reminiscences, and one reminiscence about his seeing Swami Vivekananda in London, when Swami Vivekananda was staying there and giving lectures in London. So Mahendranath Datta says, when I saw him, that he was a completely different person than what I knew as my elder brother and so forth. His face had changed, his personality had changed. He was like he had a light around him, a glow around him. His personality was shedding that light, and his audience was getting, as it were, encompassed in that tremendous glow. He describes it, I am not quoting verbatim, but this is the whole gist of his reminiscences about this. And he quotes also one gentleman that was with him, he also had come from India, his name was Krishna Menon. So he quotes from Krishna Menon. He also sees that same thing. Krishna Menon had earlier seen Vivekananda when he met him in Madras. But he says now, when he speaks, it is a completely different thing. He is not the same man I met him earlier. He has become tremendously powerful. His influence is irresistible. It is, that was what the impression was, and that is what earlier that reporter of the critics said, that I can only give I can only suggest its effect upon the audience. Because, well, he wrote down and that those words were read later on. But the effect of that tremendous glow, that Swami Vivekananda's personality was spreading all around. How can that a reporter write in this short excerpt of his lecture? So therefore, this was something very special. He had transformed himself into a wonderful instrument. This is what Swami Vivekananda always considered. In London, there was a gentleman, Eric Hammond his name. he also wrote his reminiscences of their meeting in London. And it is interesting to see what he writes, that, and I am quoting, after telling something of the earth life of Sri Ramakrishna and dwelling on his message, he said that he had not one little word of his own to utter, not one infinitesimal thought of his own to unfold. Everything, every single thing, all he has, he was himself. All he might be able to, he might be to the world, he declared, came from that single source. And then in the quote, again there is quote, in passages of exquisite eloquence, said Mr. Hammond, he dilated upon Sri Ramakrishna. Self was utterly forgotten. This is the impression that Eric Hammond got. The self was utterly forgotten, altogether ignored. I am what I am, and what I am is always due to him. Whatever in me or in my words is good and true and eternal came to me from his mouth, his heart, his soul. Sri Ramakrishna is the spring of this phase of earth's religious life, of its impulses and activities. If I can show to the world, if I can show the world one glimpse of my master, I shall not live in vain. So this was this personality. There is short books. This is not just the only place where Swami Vivekananda has expressed this. At many, many different places where they talk about Sri Ramakrishna came, or wherever he was being praised for his eloquence, he mentioned that it is all coming from that source, that Sri Ramakrishna. Only the mistakes, only something that is not doing any good to the world, that is coming from me. Everything else is of Sri Ramakrishna. There is a small book titled Sri Ramakrishna as Swamiji, means Swami Vivekananda, as Swamiji saw him. A beautiful book to understand how Swami Vivekananda always considered Sri Ramakrishna in that great light, that it is everything is that. He has also composed some poems telling that, well, this is, I am the slave of you too, that is Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. So this is how a completely egoless instrument it was. He was the voice without form. It is, let us see a little more in depth, what does it mean to be a voice without form. It is, voice without form means that the essence of the voice, the message that is important, that is, they think that to be heard and held on to, not the form of the person or the instrument from which it is coming. Like you are listening to my words, not exactly the words, not exactly the sound that is coming from my lips. It is transmitted through this microphone system. So you are getting it from the speakers hanging above your heads. Many could be listening to it on internet, live on YouTube. It is transmitted live on YouTube. So many are listening to these words from the speaker system attached to their computers or machines. Now, are those machines or are these speakers, are they giving their own speech? They are not giving their own speech. They are just authentically transmitting my words. It happened once, that I was giving a talk, and then there was the microphone speaker, and it happened sometimes that there was some problem. And as I was speaking, from the sound system it started making noise. So it is like some feedback, and it happens, some problem. So now what is happening there? My words are not authentically being transmitted. What I am speaking, there is this interference put in by the sound system, from the speakers. So the speakers or the sound system is changing the message. And so I said that, please take it out. I will shout loudly, at least you will be able to hear what I am saying authentically, not that. So that is how, the instruments should be authentic. Now, just expand on this example a little more. That Sri Ramakrishna gave the message. He didn't speak much English. Most of the lectures of Swami Vivekananda are in English. So was he transmitting the words of Sri Ramakrishna exactly? No. This instrument had the tremendous capability of translating Sri Ramakrishna's words into English. Not only that, Sri Ramakrishna gave the principles. They had to be put into this, combined with so much of philosophical thought. They have to be expanded so that people can appreciate, understand the whole idea of developing one's life through them. So, the cryptic message of Sri Ramakrishna, that which was condensed just in a few words, mostly understandable only by seeing and appreciating his tremendous life. Now this machine called Swami Vivekananda is capable of converting it into all these great teachings without slightest distortion. Without slightest distortion. Many later on, even some amongst the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, thought that, what Swami Vivekananda is telling was not what Sri Ramakrishna is telling. Although they intrinsically knew that Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda cannot be actually different, cannot be giving different messages, yet they thought that Sri Ramakrishna laid stress on God realization. One must realize God. And here Swami Vivekananda is telling to get engaged in so many service works. It doesn't seem to be the same message. But gradually they understood. See, that it is Swami Vivekananda had to make that message of Sri Ramakrishna, unfold it into the psychology and philosophy of yoga so that it can be implemented by each and everyone. He had to present it in the light of all the ancient and modern, Eastern and Western philosophical and scriptural works, he had to place it on the cultural backgrounds of different nations. And so it needed a great capable instrument, and all this was to be done without causing the slightest aberration in the message. The same Sri Ramakrishna's message is being delivered by this instrument. That is why he said, I am voice without form. It is the same message that is emanating. What Sri Ramakrishna's message is to the world, that message is emanating in an elaborated way, in an audible manner, in understandable manner for all people in the world. That is why Sri Ramakrishna had told that this Naren will be teaching the world. This is how, you see, the teaching is imparted. Sometimes Swami Vivekananda said, well, yes, he compared Jesus and Paul, that Sri Ramakrishna was like Jesus and pointing to himself, he is like Paul, Saint Paul, who is spreading the gospel of Christianity to all people around. So it is there the message is to be converted into various things. Like, you have the movie, now it is made in one language. But then there is the technique or the way of dubbing it in another language, or putting subtitles and all that, so that you do not understand that language, but that movie makes sense for you even without the original language in which it is made. You have the books written, again, there also this process goes on of becoming an authentic instrument without the ego interfering. It is when the ego interferes, then the message gets all mixed up. I think, yes, my desires, my preferences, they play a role in describing that. And therefore, if we want to speak about the message of a great sage, we can do it better and better as our ego is lesser and lesser. That is that voice without form. There is a beautiful story in the Vaishnava literature, that it is a poetic imagination, that it is all the gopis, they were concerned that we all want Lord Krishna's company, we all want to be near him all the time. But look, this flute, he keeps this flute with him and puts the flute on his lips. We don't get that opportunity. So they came to the flute and said, hey, what did you do? Tell us your secret. Why Lord keeps you on his lips? Please tell me your secret. And the flute said, well, I don't have any quality. I do not have anything to say my own. The only quality that I have is I am empty. I am an empty bamboo. And therefore whatever Lord wants to play, it just gets played. All those tunes just get played authentically. I do not add anything of my own. That egolessness, that is the secret, friends. of this idea. This is what the voice that Swami Vivekananda, all these complete works, his lectures and all, people heard. That voice was not changing anything in the message that was coming from Sri Ramakrishna. We read in Holy Mother's life the other day here that one of the disciples, a very prominent disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, because of whom we have that wonderful book, Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, one of the most useful book for the seekers of spiritual wisdom. Now this master, he was called master, he had, because he was a school teacher, he had doubt about Swami Vivekananda's this idea of doing service and all that. He thought that, well, that is not exactly the message of Sri Ramakrishna. And when, much after Swami Vivekananda's passing away, he accompanied Holy Mother at Benares or Varanasi, where there was the hospital that is run by Ramakrishna Mission. This order established by Swami Vivekananda, Ramakrishna Mission. Now this there, Holy Mother saw how patients are, poor patients who cannot afford treatment anywhere, they were being brought and treated as if they are the veritable embodiment of God. And when Holy Mother saw this, she was very happy and said that I see Sri Ramakrishna's presence in all this. Sri Ramakrishna is here. And at that time, to make the long story short, somebody went and reported it to this master or M, Mahendranath Gupta, so who used to be critical about these things, that look, Holy Mother says like this. And then he said, then that settles the matter. Holy Mother is the last word on these things. It is. So we see that this Sri Ramakrishna's message is translated in such a wonderful manner. What an instrument that Narendranath Swami Vivekananda was. And therefore it is just not possible for anybody to imitate. He told in many of his, especially in his letters, it comes out because letters are more personal. Lecture people give in front of a big audience. But in many of his letters he says, well, as soon as this message, this work is done, I have a message to give, and then I will go, I will retire. That's it. So that is the wonderful idea that we have to appreciate, and it gives us this message too. If we want to be the instrument of God, if we want the God to speak through us, then become egoless. Reduce the ego. Let us not go for credit that, well, whether my name is there or not, whether it is published under my name or not, if I am getting due credit for it or not. These things matter, in these research papers and PhD theses and whatever, that, yeah. I remember one lady, she was very disturbed, very upset. She was doing some research and said that, well, my paper got published. But then why are you then upset? It got published in that prestigious journal. Why are you upset? No, my name as author was put number 3. Although I did most of the work, it should have been number 2 because the main professor's name comes first. But then second should have been my name. My name was put third. And so, in those circles, it is therefore vying for credit and so forth, But if we want to be the instrument of God, the process has to be completely reversed. I don't want any credit. I want to be voice without form. Thank you, friends. Let us meditate for half a minute, and then if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Yes, please. Oh, you have a question. Come on.
You say that voice without form, he was transmitting the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. Does it also mean that he does not have any Swami Vivekananda? He is also a principle. That is one part of the question. The other is, who is this Sri Ramakrishna in that context, basically? How do we understand?
Yeah, very good question. Not very easy to answer, really. Because we have been seeing that in this whole message, Swami Vivekananda was just an instrument. Then was there not any Swami Vivekananda in it? And what is this Sri Ramakrishna in this context? Well, Sri Ramakrishna in this context is the reality, the truth, the divine that is manifested in human form to teach us. That is Sri Ramakrishna. So, and what is this idea of teaching? What is this incarnation of God? It is for reminding human beings what is the purpose of their life. We forget to look for it, It is, we just keep on living on an ad hoc basis. We never think much deeply about life as to what should be the goal of my life. It is so to remind people about that the goal, to present them the goal of life and also the means to achieve it. That is the purpose of this human manifestation presented by Jesus in that one line, that I am the goal, I am the way. So this is all incarnations that they do. In Bhagavad Gita you read exactly the similar thing, that I am the goal of humanity. And this is, beyond me there is nothing. And then as people follow me, they are sure to reach the goal. So this is the idea, and this is Sri Ramakrishna. That, yes, this God incarnate to teach. Now that teaching is given, but not exactly as it would be audible, understandable, and practicable for all people. So another instrument is needed to disseminate that message. So therefore you will see all incarnations, they bring an instrument like that with them, through which this message gets spread. I gave like the example, the mundane examples of the sound system and so forth. So Sri Ramakrishna is that divine in the teachership form. And then Swami Vivekananda. Was there nothing of Swami Vivekananda? Everything as instrument. Like, yes, imagine how much capability such an instrument requires. Even, to make this instrument by which you are hearing this lecture now, all the speaker system and everything, it requires a lot of work. The instrument is very, an exquisite instrument with lot of intricacies, lot of finesse to it, so that the voice does not get distorted. It comes exactly in a manner that everybody can hear it and so forth. So that is the instrument. So Swami Vivekananda, what is it? An instrument. That is an instrument of making this message heard in the most appropriate manner, understandable for people of various different temperaments, different stages of evolution, and people coming from various different cultural and religious backgrounds. That is that instrument called Swami Vivekananda. Yes, please. Yes, Barbara.
Was Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna, did they live during the same years they were?
Well, yes, that is how Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, their physical life shared about 5 to 6 years. And during these 5-6 years, Sri Ramakrishna trained this instrument, trained the personality of Swami Vivekananda so that it could become the ideal instrument. It is, yes.
I thought that they were sharing time here in this part together. Why, or maybe explain why Sri Ramakrishna didn't use his own voice?
Very good question again. Yeah. Why did he need an instrument? There is the reason for that Sri Ramakrishna, as manufacturer of this message, was utterly incapable of being the distributor of it. It is just as the manufacturers, they do not become the retailers. They have to have a retail chain because the requirements are different. Sri Ramakrishna, as a person, as God incarnate, he had to practice this and to demonstrate these things in such a way that this powerful message gets generated. And then there is the distribution system. Like you have, all this electricity that is coming here. It is not generated at the level of generation. It is not at that same voltage. It might be at a very high voltage. and it cannot be just supplied like that. So everywhere you have the transformers. Now these transformers, they make that electric power to bring it to such a level that then it can be supplied to us. So exactly that is the reason that Sri Ramakrishna could not himself give it to everybody. It is not possible for most of us to understand Sri Ramakrishna as it is. In fact, there is a very nice conversation between another disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. His name was Swami Premananda. So Swami Premananda, somebody told him, one youngster who used to come, he said, well, to read Sri Ramakrishna, it is so simple. Swami Vivekananda is so tough to read, very difficult to understand. And Swami Premananda said, oh my goodness, if even you find Swami Vivekananda difficult to understand, Sri Ramakrishna is a far cry. It gives an illusion that we are understanding it. Because of the stories and simple words, it is an easy read, but not an easy understanding. We get the impression after reading a nice story of Sri Ramakrishna and that, oh, got it, understood. But no, it is not understood at all. So we require, therefore, somebody to open it up for us. Then, when it is opened up, then we understand it. It is like, on your passports or many things, a driving license, all your information on your credit cards, there is, you see, a strip. On that strip, so much material is condensed and put, encrypted and put. You cannot read it by the naked eyes. Or even if you put glasses, you will not be able to read anything on it. Because it has to pass through a lesser instrument which decodes it. And then it becomes apparent, what is there. So Sri Ramakrishna's message was like that. And so it needed to be expanded, decoded. In different formats it had to be given. So that is Swami Vivekananda. If you see, therefore, the distinction between them, you will get my point. Sri Ramakrishna did not really go to school, almost illiterate. He had abhorrence for calculations and all that. He did not have that oratory. In fact, he was a stammerer. He did not go to give lectures anywhere. Swami Vivekananda, a man of immense learning. If you see, even forget the spiritual part, if you see how many subjects he has got mastery over, and that becomes apparent when you read the complete works of Swami Vivekananda. He was, as a college-going boy, he had mastered many Eastern and Western philosophies at great depth. He was having correspondence with Spencer, and he had pointed out one folly in one of Spencer's books, and got reply from Spencer that, well, thank you, I will try to correct it in my next edition. He was a master musician. He had a command on modern mathematics. he was also so well versed in history of different nations. If you read some of his books, you know that you see his mastery over literature, mastery over history, mastery over art and architecture, and also that of the art and the architecture of various different nations. It is just amazing. Even that secular knowledge of his, in fact, that can be a topic of a different lecture. The secular, non-religious learning of Swami Vivekananda, that itself is amazing. Look at Sri Ramakrishna, completely opposite. And therefore, that instrument called Sri Ramakrishna was intrinsically, inherently incapable of handling these things. Okay, yes. Yes, Jim.
So, I'm a little bit confused.
Only a little bit?
So, you have two sides. You have the message being given out, and you have the receiver.
Yeah.
When you talk about Swami Vivekananda giving the message, and the same thing with Ramakrishna being different but giving out the message, I'm getting, okay, the voice is the message. It's not the medium, it's the message. But every listener has different experience, different interpretation because of their filters. And I would like you to elaborate.
Very good, very correct. In fact, that will require another lecture. But anyway, I will give you some hints about it. That yes, each of us has to understand that message, receive that message through our very peculiar, very individual psyche, which has its constitution, so to say. And therefore, when, like I am speaking, teachers become very quickly acquainted with this fact that the same lecture that they are giving to, say, 50 students, there would be 50 ways of understanding that same message. It is fortunately only 50. If even one person will understand one way now, and after 1 hour another way. So, because it gets filtered, it is perfectly correct. And therefore, the teacher has to be really capable of taking in the grasp all these different psyches and make it therefore suitable to all these different people, so that they can receive it. In one place, Swami Vivekananda says that the great teacher is the one who can transform oneself into these different students, and thus that message goes inside the students. He himself, that teacher himself, in a way transforms oneself into all the different students. Thus this information can be given. I am very thankful to you for bringing up this point. It is very important, and sometimes we will try to discuss this idea of the assimilation of message, the connection between the teacher and student. Thank you. So, already we have spent more time than we should. I hope that you didn't get scared by looking at this big book. I was quoting only half a page from it. So, it is, I request Vishwanath to start his offertory. His means Vedanta Society's offertory. He has no ego, so he deposits everything. Coming week, all the programs during the week will go on as usual. there are the birthday celebrations of Swami Brahmananda that will be on 19th of this month, that is Friday, coming Friday. And coming Sunday there is the, that is Sunday is 21st, the birth anniversary of Swami Trigunatitananda. So, but the classes on Tuesdays and Fridays will go on along with that. It is Tuesdays, the topic is Sri Ramakrishna and his divine play. Am I right, Charlie? Yeah, okay. Yes. And then on Fridays, it is Jnana Yoga. And then the Sunday lecture will be again a wonderful discussion on one a message by Swami Vivekananda. It is spread in different places in his works, and that is norms of morality. It is a very important topic. What should be considered moral and what should be considered not moral? So that will be the topic for discussion next Sunday. So now we will have the Arati. Before that, let me chant the closing prayer. After Arati, friends, you are all invited to join the soup supper in the basement. May the Divine, who is Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Great Spirit of the Native Americans, Ahur Mazda of the Zoroastrians, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the all-loving being manifest himself unto us and grant us abiding understanding and all-consuming divine love. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.